The last shelter the world above had burned long ago, and the skies had turned the color of ash. There was no sound left on the surface of the earth, except the distant hum of falling dust and the occasional groan of broken steel. For most of the human race, the war had ended the moment the alien fleets came from the dark edges of space and turned the great cities into oceans of glass. Entire nations had vanished in the roar of strange weapons, and what remained of humanity scattered like dry leaves before a storm. Far beneath the ruins, in a narrow concrete bunker, a young man named Evan sat on the cold floor, leaning his back against the cracked wall. His breath came slow and heavy, and his dry lips trembled as he stared at the small tin cup in his hands. It was empty, and had been for 2 days. The water filters had stopped working, and the reserves had run out. His throat felt like sandpaper, and every swallow hurt more than the last. The bunker had once belonged to a military outpost long abandoned before Evan found it. The metal doors had kept him safe from wandering drones and scanning beams, but food and water were nearly gone. He had tried scavenging in the ruins above, but the air was filled with toxins, and the risk of being spotted by alien patrols made every step a gamble. He had managed to survive on stale ration bars and the last few bottles of purified water, but now even those were gone. Evan closed his eyes, trying to ignore the ache in his stomach and the burning in his throat. Outside, somewhere far above, the world still trembled with the hum of alien machines, but down here in the silence, he felt himself fading. He told himself every day that someone somewhere might still be fighting back, that the resistance might find him, but deep down he knew no one was coming. It was late in the night cycle when he heard at first a strange scraping sound near the outer hatch. His heart leapt in his chest, and for a moment he thought one of the drones had finally found him. He reached for the rusted metal rod he kept near the wall, his only weapon if it came to a fight. Holding his breath, he crept closer to the sound. When the hatch creaked open, his pulse thundered in his ears, and he raised the rod ready to strike. But instead of the gleaming shell of a machine, something else stumbled through. A figure collapsed just inside the door, falling to the ground with a dull thud. Evan froze. The figure was humanoid, but different, slender and taller than him, with skin the faint color of silver moonlight. Long strands of pale blue hair clung to her face, and strange markings ran across her arms, glowing faintly in the dark. Evan hesitated, every instinct telling him to push her back outside, but then he saw the blood seeping from her side. It was thick and faintly luminous, like liquid starlight pooling beneath her. He lowered the rod slowly and crouched beside her. She was breathing shallowly, her chest rising and falling in ragged bursts. He whispered softly, unsure if she could understand, "You're hurt." Her eyes flickered open, revealing irises the color of molten gold. She tried to speak, but only a few broken words came out in a language he couldn't understand. After a moment, she managed something close to human speech. "Help me." The sound of her voice was faint, almost like a sigh. Evan hesitated for only a moment before dragging her fully inside and sealing the hatch again. He laid her on the cold floor near the dim light and pulled off his worn jacket to press against the wound. Her skin was warm, far warmer than his own, and strangely soft despite the strange texture of the glowing lines beneath. He found the last of his medical supplies, an old antiseptic kit left behind by whoever had used the bunker before him, and tried his best to clean the wound. The alien girl winced but did not resist. Instead, her eyes stayed locked on him, as though studying his face. Her breathing steadied a little, and after a while she managed to sit up, though weakly. She spoke slowly, as though choosing each word carefully. "My name is Lyra. My ship destroyed. I hide." Long time. Evan nodded, though he did not fully understand. He pointed at himself and said softly, "Evan." She repeated the sound clumsily before nodding. For a long while neither spoke. He simply sat across from her, watching her as she regained a little strength. He knew he should be afraid. She was alien, possibly dangerous, and yet something in her exhausted gaze told him she was just as desperate as he was. When he finally tried to drink from his empty tin, she noticed his struggle and tilted her head, as though thinking Her golden eyes narrowed slightly, and then she touched the glowing marks on her forearm within. Moments of faint blue liquid began to seep from beneath her skin, collecting along the lines. She caught a drop on her fingertip and held it out to him. Frowned, not understanding, but she gestured to his throat and then mimed drinking. He hesitated, his instinct screaming not to trust something so strange, but his body ached for water and his head spun from thirst. He leaned forward, letting a single drop touch his tongue, expecting bitterness. Instead it was cool, smooth, and faintly sweet. Sensation spread through his throat, easing the dryness in an instant. Lyra nodded slowly as though confirming something, and then let more of the liquid collect, cupping her hand so he could drink. He hesitated again, but desperation won and he drank. Carefully, each swallow seemed to chase the pain away, and strength returned to his trembling muscles when he looked at her again. She smiled faintly, though her eyes still held exhaustion. For the first time in weeks, Evan felt something like hope. The bunker no longer felt like a tomb. Instead, it felt like a fragile thread between life and death. And now somehow, they were tied together by it. That night, as he sat against the wall listening to the distant hum of alien machines above, he thought about how strange the universe had become. A few days ago he was alone waiting to die, and now he shared the last shelter with a being from another world. He knew nothing about her people, or why they had come, or why they had turned Earth into a wasteland, but he knew one thing clearly: she had saved him when everything else had failed. Far above the ruins, the night was quiet, but deep in the dark of the bunker, a fragile alliance had begun to form. One human, one alien, two survivors clinging to the last scraps of life while the rest of the world burned unseen. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, they both understood the same silent truth: if they were going to live, it would be together. Fragile alliance. The silence in the bunker was heavy but no longer lonely. The steady rhythm of two separate breaths filled the air, and for Evan that sound was strange and comforting. He sat near the old console where broken screens cast faint shadows across the walls while Lyra rested on a thin blanket on the floor. Her wounds were still raw, but she no longer trembled, and her strange golden eyes followed every sound around them like a creature always on guard. Evan tried to ignore the hollow ache in his stomach and focused instead on repairing a cracked air filter that had begun to rattle again. Without clean air, the toxins above would slowly seep inside and finish what the war had started. He had learned to live with hunger and exhaustion, but not with poison. He worked in silence until he noticed Lyra crawling closer. Her movements were graceful, even though her body still seemed weak. She pointed to the broken filter, and then shook her head slowly. "This not safe," she said, carefully in her fractured human speech. "Bad air come fast." Evan sighed, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "I know, but this is all we've got. If this fails, we die down here." Lyra tilted her head, studying the damaged machinery, and then reached for the device that hung around her neck. It was a thin metal band holding a small glass-like orb. She touched it lightly, and the orb lit with a faint glow. In seconds, a holographic image formed, showing a diagram of some kind of filtration system, unlike anything had seen her species clearly used technology far beyond human design. She gestured to the filter, and then back to the hologram. Evan understood her meaning quickly. If they could combine parts from her tech with the old bunker system, they could create something safer. For the first time since the invasion, he felt a glimmer of possibility. Together they worked slowly through the dim hours. Lyra's long, slender fingers moved with delicate precision while Evan handled the heavier pieces, neither fully understanding the other's language but somehow communicating through gestures and glances. By the time the new system hummed softly with a steady rhythm, Evan could already breathe easier, and he felt gratitude settle deep inside him. Later he offered her the last piece of a stale ration bar, but she shook her head and instead placed her hand over her chest. Then she reached into a small pouch attached to her torn clothing and pulled out a small crystalline capsule. When she crushed it between her fingers, a thick blue gel appeared, which she carefully placed on her tongue And swallowed food for me, she explained slowly. Human food bad for my body. Evan nodded, understanding that their bodies were made for different worlds. She studied him quietly for a while, then her gaze softened. You need more. She tapped lightly against her own forearm, where the glowing marks ran beneath the skin. Then she cupped her hand, letting a faint trickle of the strange blue liquid gather there again. He hesitated, but his thirst still burned, and he accepted it carefully. The taste was the same, cool and faintly sweet, but this time he noticed something else. His body felt stronger afterward, as though the liquid carried more than just hydration. Days passed inside the bunker, and the fragile alliance between them grew stronger. Evan taught her human words while she showed him small pieces of alien knowledge, simple things like identifying edible plants outside by their shapes, or how to listen for the faint vibrations in the ground that warned of patrol drones approaching. Their survival now depended on both of them, and slowly the walls between their species began to fall. But outside the ruins, the danger was growing every night. They heard distant rumbles from the skies, and sometimes strange lights passed across the cracks above. Evan suspected the aliens were still hunting for the last survivors. He had seen the drones before, fast, silent machines that killed without hesitation. Lyra confirmed his fears one evening as she traced a shape in the dust on the floor, a triangular outline with sharp edges. Hunter drones, she said quietly. If they find this place. No more. Evan felt a cold weight settle in his chest. The bunker had kept him safe so far, but if the drones discovered it, there would be no escape. He thought about asking Lyra how to fight them, but she shook her head slowly. No fight, she whispered, only hide or run. That night, Evan lay awake listening to the hum of the repaired filter and the quiet breathing beside him. He thought about how strange fate had become. Just weeks ago, he had been alone, ready to die, and now his life depended on an alien girl who had fallen out of the sky. He wondered what she thought of humans, if she had come here as an enemy, or if she had simply been caught in a war. None of them understood. The next morning, Lyra woke him before the dim lights of the bunker fully brightened. Her expression was tense, and her ears twitched at every faint sound. She pointed upward towards the sealed hatch and whispered softly, "Listen." Evan held his breath. And then he heard it too. A faint, distant hum that grew louder with each passing second. It was unlike the usual soft drone noise. This sound was sharper, colder, as if cutting through the air. Lyra's expression darkened. "Hunter drone," she breathed. Evan's heart pounded as he scrambled to grab his few belongings. The rusted rod, the half-empty ration pack, the small toolkit. He didn't want to leave the bunker, but Lyra was already preparing to move. She touched the walls lightly, searching for something, before pressing her palm against a panel near the back. A hidden door hissed open, revealing a narrow tunnel beneath the floor. "Old escape path," she said quickly. "Must go now." Without another word, they slipped inside the darkness, sealing the hatch behind them. The tunnel was damp and smelled of rust, but at least it led them away from the sound above. As they moved deeper, Lyra kept one hand lightly against the walls, sensing vibrations. The way she had taught him, while Evan stumbled blindly, she moved with quiet certainty. After what felt like hours, they reached a small cavern where broken pipes ran along the ceiling. Lyra finally stopped breathing heavily, but her golden eyes still glimmered with tension. "Safe now," she whispered softly, but her voice carried no relief. Evan leaned against the cold wall, wiping sweat from his brow, and tried to slow his racing heart. For now they had escaped, but he knew the drones would not stop searching, and sooner or later, this small refuge would no longer be enough. He looked at Lyra and saw the same thought reflected in her expression. They had survived this far, but survival meant more than hiding. It meant moving, finding somewhere safer, maybe even finding others like him somewhere out there in that dim cavern far beneath the dead world above. Evan understood something clearly for the first time. He was no longer just a survivor, clinging to life in the ruins. He was part of something larger, now tied to this alien girl by more than desperation. Together they had a chance to endure The sound of distant machines still echoed faintly above them. But here in the shadows of the Earth, two fragile lives had chosen to trust one another and take the first step into an uncertain future. Between hunger and hope, the tunnels stretched endlessly beneath the ruins like the veins of a forgotten world, and Evan had begun to lose all sense of time. There was no sunlight down here, no stars, no winds to guide him. Only the faint blue glow from Lyra's markings lit their way, and without her he would have been swallowed by the darkness completely. The air was damp and heavy, and every drop of water that fell from the pipes above echoed like distant whispers. For 3 days, they moved through the maze of tunnels, stopping only when exhaustion forced them. Lyra led the way most of the time, with her strange senses guiding them. Around blocked passages and unstable shafts, Evan carried what little remained of his supplies and tried to match her silent grace, but he was human, and his body had limits. His legs ached constantly, and his throat burned again from thirst one night. As they rested in a small chamber carved into the rock, Evan leaned against the wall, feeling his strength fading fast. He had tried rationing what little they had, but it was not enough. His lips cracked as he swallowed hard, and Lyra watched him. Quietly, her golden eyes reflected the faint blue light around them, and there was something almost sad in the way she studied him. She moved closer without a word, kneeling beside him. Her slender fingers traced the glowing lines on her arm, and again the pale blue liquid began to gather. It was easier for her now, as if her body had adapted to his needs. She cupped her hand, offering it to him, and Evan hesitated only for a moment before drinking carefully. The liquid was cool and sweet, but it was more than simple hydration. It filled his body with a strange warmth, and his fatigue faded little by little. He wondered how her species had developed such an adaptation, and what kind of world had shaped them to survive. Like this, Lyra noticed his curiosity and tried to explain using broken words and gestures. Long time before, she said slowly, "My people live far from sun, no plants, no rivers, so body make life water for young ones and sick ones for family." Evan listened quietly, trying to piece her meaning together. He realized then that what she gave him so freely was something deeply personal, something meant only for her kind, and yet she trusted him enough to share it. As the days passed, the bond between them grew stronger. He taught her more human words while she taught him how to hear the earth around them, how to sense the faint vibrations left behind by the machines above. Sometimes they would stop together in silence, pressing their hands to the cold stone floor, feeling the subtle tremors beneath as the hunter drones searched the surface like predators sniffing out prey. One night, while they sat near a broken vent, sharing quiet breaths, Lyra suddenly stiffened. She turned her head sharply, as if listening to something Evan could not hear. Her markings glimmered faintly brighter than usual, and her expression grew tense. She whispered softly, "Hunter drone close, very close." Evan's chest tightened, and he grabbed his makeshift rod as though it could protect him against machines built to kill. They doused their small light and pressed themselves against the wall, holding their breath. Moments later, the faint hum reached Evan's ears too. It was sharp and piercing, like a swarm of angry insects, and it grew louder. With every second, Lyra reached for the device around her neck and pressed it firmly. The small orb emitted a pulse of soft light. Barely visible in the dark, she leaned close to Evan and whispered, "Hide with me." She led him into a narrow crevice between two slabs of fallen stone, barely wide enough for them to fit. They crouched low together as the sound passed overhead, through a crack in the stone. Evan saw a sliver of moving shadow on the ceiling above. The drone was small, no larger than a chair, but sleek and deadly. Its sensors swept in slow arcs, and its thin limbs crawled like a spider over the metal pipes. He held his breath so hard his lungs ached as it hovered directly above them, scanning the chamber for signs of life. Lyra's body remained perfectly still beside him, her eyes glowing faintly but dimmed, as though instinctively suppressing their light. After what felt like hours, the sound finally faded, and the drone moved on. Lyra exhaled softly, and Evan realized he had been Trembling, she touched his shoulder lightly and nodded, safe now, but not safe long. She glanced back toward the dark tunnels, and he understood what she meant. The drones would never stop searching. If they stayed underground forever, sooner or later, they would be found. That night they spoke more than usual, huddled close in the cold chamber. Lyra told him about her people, how they had not come to conquer at first, but to seek resources for survival. How a faction among them had decided humanity was a threat and launched attacks before any peaceful talks could happen. She herself had been part of a small group who opposed the war, who believed humans were not enemies. Her ship had been shot down when she refused to follow orders. Evan listened. Quietly, his thoughts tangled between anger and understanding. He wanted to hate her people for what they had done to Earth. But when he looked at Lyra, he could not find that hatred in himself. She had saved him more times than he could count, and she had risked her life just to keep him alive. Later, as they rested, Evan could not sleep. He sat against the wall, staring into the faint glow of her markings, thinking about everything she had said. If there were others like her who wanted peace, maybe there was still hope. Maybe somewhere beyond the ruins humans were still fighting back, and maybe they were not as alone as he had thought. The next morning, Lyra woke him early, her expression urgent. She had used her device to scan the tunnels ahead and found something strange. She led him through a narrow passage until they reached a cavern larger than any they had seen before. At its center lay the wreckage of a human resistance outpost, old and forgotten, but filled with broken equipment and scattered crates. Evan's heart leapt at the sight of it. They searched the ruins together and found pieces of old communication gear, some of it beyond repair, but some still functional. Lyra studied the tech curiously, her fingers dancing over the controls, and after a few minutes she looked up at him with a faint smile. Maybe send signal, maybe find your people. Evan felt hope bloom inside him for the first time in months, but before he could respond, a deep vibration rolled through the ground beneath them. Lyra froze, her eyes wide. She whispered one word: Hunter. The drones had tracked them. Evan grabbed what they could carry, while Lyra activated the fragments of her device to jam signals for as long as possible. They ran through the tunnels with the hum of machines closing in behind them, each sound growing sharper, each moment heavier. Evan's lungs burned and his legs screamed for rest, but he did not slow, not now, not when the chance for survival was so close. Somewhere above, the world remained broken and silent, but down here in the endless dark, two lives ran side by side, driven by the fragile spark of hope that refused to die. The hunt. The tunnels trembled beneath their feet as Evan and Lyra ran, the echoes of their hurried breaths mixing with the cold hum of machines closing in behind them. The sound of the hunter drones was no longer distant. It was sharp and hungry, filling the darkness with an unspoken promise of death. Every turn through the maze of stone passages brought the metallic thrum closer, like predators driving their prey toward a trap. Evan's lungs burned with every breath and his legs felt heavy as lead, but he forced himself forward. The dim glow from Lyra's markings guided the way through the pitch-black tunnels. Without her, he would have been blind, lost, and dead by now. She moved ahead with quick, controlled steps, her body swaying lightly as if every muscle remembered survival in ways his human frame could never match. At one sharp bend, Lyra suddenly stopped, holding her hand up. Evan pressed his back against the damp wall, heart pounding so hard he thought the drones might hear it. She crouched low, her golden eyes narrowing as she touched the stone floor with her fingertips, sensing vibrations the way she had taught him. Her voice was barely a whisper when she spoke. "They split," she said softly, struggling with human words. Two behind, one ahead. Evan's chest tightened. They were being cornered. Lyra turned toward him, her expression sharp but calm. "Follow me, quiet now." She led him into a narrow shaft that angled steeply upward, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees. The air grew colder the higher they climbed, carrying a faint metallic scent that told Evan they were close to an old ventilation grid. When they reached the top, Lyra pressed her palm against a sealed hatch and her glowing markings flared softly as she whispered something in her own tongue. The lock clicked open and a rush of stale air spilled in. They emerged into a forgotten maintenance chamber filled with broken pipes and rusted machinery. Evan paused to catch his breath, but Lyra crouched low, scanning every shadow. Through a grated opening above, faint shafts of pale light fell from the surface world. For a moment, Evan thought they might have escaped, but Lyra's expression remained tense. "They come fast," she whispered. "Not much time." Evan wanted to ask what she planned, but the words never left his mouth. A sudden burst of sharp, metallic clicking echoed through the chamber, and then a hunter drone dropped silently from the ceiling like a spider descending on its prey. Its body was sleek and angular, black metal absorbing the dim light, and its limbs were long and thin with claws sharp enough to cut through steel. A red sensor pulsed faintly at its center, locking instantly onto their heat signatures. "Move!" Lyra shouted, grabbing Evan's arm. They dove behind an overturned console, just as a searing beam of energy sliced through the air where they had stood. The heat singed the tips of Evan's hair and filled the chamber with the acrid stench of burning metal. The machine emitted a sharp, rapid hum as it adjusted its aim, advancing slowly. Evan swung his rusted rod desperately, striking the console to draw its attention while Lyra crouched low and activated the device on her neck. A faint pulse of energy burst outward, flickering across the chamber like a wave, momentarily scrambling the drone's sensors. "Go!" she urged. They darted toward a side passage, but another drone crawled out from the shadows, its limbs moving with terrifying speed. Evan tried to run, but the machine lunged, slashing across his side. Pain exploded through his ribs and he fell hard against the ground, gasping. Blood seeped quickly through his torn shirt, and he tasted copper on his tongue. Lyra turned sharply, her expression fierce in a way he had never seen before. She pressed both hands against the glowing lines on her arms, and the markings across her body ignited with a blinding light. A strange energy surged outward, slamming into the drone like an invisible hammer. The machine screeched and crashed against the wall, its claws sparking as it convulsed violently before going still. Evan blinked in disbelief. He had never seen Lyra use her abilities like this before. She knelt beside him immediately, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled a small crystalline vial from her pouch. She crushed it, releasing a faint mist, and pressed it against his wound. The liquid seeped into his skin, and a cold sensation spread through his ribs, numbing the pain. He managed to whisper, "What was that?" Lyra glanced at him, her voice soft but urgent. "Healing serum, only few left. Must not get hurt again." Evan tried to move, but Lyra stopped him with a gentle push. "You are important," she said, her golden eyes locking onto his. "Humans resistant. Machines want you alive." He frowned, struggling to understand. Resistant to what? She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Machines carry sickness, spread it. Kills my people, kills many humans too. But your body different. They need you, you are key." The weight of her words sank deep into him. For so long, he had believed he was just another forgotten survivor hiding beneath a dying world. Now he realized the machines were not hunting him to kill him, but to capture him. He was something more than prey. He was valuable. Before he could ask anything else, a deafening roar filled the chamber as a third drone smashed through the ceiling, scattering debris across the floor. Its red sensor burned brighter than the others, and Evan knew this one was stronger, faster, deadlier. Lyra pulled him to his feet and they ran, stumbling through another narrow tunnel. Behind them, the machine followed relentlessly, its limbs scraping against the stone, sparks flying where metal met rock. Every step sent pain lancing through. Evan sighed, but he forced himself forward, trusting Lyra's light to guide them. Finally, They burst into a massive underground shaft where rusted ladders climbed toward the faint glow of the surface far above. Lyra pointed upward. "We go up. No choice." Evan hesitated, looking back at the dark tunnel where the drone's red sensor was already glowing faintly. There was no time to think. He grabbed the ladder and began climbing, his breath ragged and shallow. Lyra followed close behind, her body glowing brighter to light their way. Halfway up, the drone reached the base of the ladder and launched itself upward with terrifying speed. Evan felt the metal tremble beneath him as it climbed after them like a predator scaling a tree. "Faster!" Lyra urged, pushing him upward with one hand while she aimed her device downward with the other. A pulse of light erupted from the orb, striking the drone and slowing it briefly, but not stopping it entirely. Its claws tore into the rungs just below her feet, sparks showering around them. They reached the top and Evan shoved against the hatch with everything he had left. It burst open, and they tumbled into the ruins of the surface world where pale light stretched across a dead landscape. The air was sharp and thin, but after so many days underground, even the ruined sky felt vast and open. Lyra pulled him behind a collapsed structure, just as the drone emerged from the hatch below, its sensor glowing like a red star against the gray dust. They were exposed now, nowhere left to hide, and Evan could feel his heart pounding as the machine fixed its gaze on them. But before it could strike, Lyra placed both hands on the ground and closed her eyes. The markings across her skin flared with a brilliant surge of energy, brighter than anything Evan had seen. The earth beneath the drone cracked violently, sending it crashing into a fissure as the ground swallowed it whole. Lyra collapsed immediately after, her glow dimming to almost nothing. Evan caught her before she hit the ground, her breathing shallow and strained. "You saved us," he whispered. Her golden eyes fluttered open, just enough to meet his. "Not safe yet," she murmured weakly. "We must reach the outpost." Above them, the dead sky stretched endlessly, and Evan knew this was only the beginning. The hunters would return, stronger and faster than before, but now he also knew something else. Lyra had risked everything for him, and whatever made him important to the machines might be the only chance left for humanity, the last refuge the cold wind scraped across. The broken earth as Evan and Lyra moved slowly toward the distant horizon. The ruins stretched endlessly around them like the bones of a dead world. The sun hung pale and weak behind a curtain of dust and ash, its light barely reaching the cracked surface. They had been walking for hours, maybe longer, time losing meaning as exhaustion settled deep into Evan's bones. Each step felt heavier than the last, but he forced himself to keep going. Lyra leaned on him for support. Her glowing markings had faded since the battle in the tunnels, and now only a faint trace of light pulsed beneath her skin. She moved with quiet determination, but Evan could feel the tremor in her body. She was still weak from the energy she had spent destroying the hunter drone. Her breaths were shallow and slow, yet she refused to stop. In the distance, rising above the rubble and broken towers, stood the outline of an old structure barely clinging to existence. It was small and almost swallowed by dust, but its jagged silhouette gave even a spark of hope. Lyra had called it an outpost, a place built by humans long ago during the first days of the invasion, when there was still resistance and belief in victory. Perhaps something inside could help them survive by the time they reached the gates. The sky was already shifting to a dim violet. The sun was sinking, and long shadows stretched across the dead land. The outpost walls were made of reinforced metal, now rusted and fractured. The main gate hung crooked on its hinges as if time itself had been tearing it apart. Evan placed his shoulder against the heavy steel and pushed until the gap widened enough for them to slip inside. The air inside was heavy and still. The outpost lay silent as a grave. Its walkways were covered in layers of dust and old scorch marks scarred the walls. Pieces of broken machines littered the ground where desperate battles had once taken place. Evan could almost hear the echoes of shouted commands and distant gunfire from a time when humanity had not yet surrendered. Lyra touched one of the walls gently, her glowing fingertips tracing strange markings etched into the metal. Her voice was soft when she spoke. Humans fought here long ago. They tried to hide, but machines always find. She looked around slowly, scanning the shadows as though expecting danger. Evan forced himself forward, searching through every broken console and shattered crate. He hoped to find food, medicine, anything they could use, but most of what remained had rotted or corroded beyond use. The silence pressed heavily around them until it became almost unbearable. Then Lyra stopped suddenly. Her ears twitched and she tilted her head, listening. Evan froze beside her, trying to catch the sound. At first there was nothing but the soft hum of the wind. Then it came faint and distant, but growing clearer, a sharp, rhythmic vibration, almost like a heartbeat, carried through the metal beneath their feet. "They come," she whispered, and her faint glow pulsed slightly brighter. "Drones track us here." Evan's chest tightened. They had barely escaped the tunnels, and now the hunters were on their trail again. But before panic could take him, Lyra pointed toward a sealed chamber at the far end of the outpost. Its door was different from the others, intact, smooth, untouched by time. A faded emblem above it bore the words Project Haven. Without hesitation, they crossed the ruined hall and reached the door. Lyra examined the control panel, her glowing fingers dancing across ancient keys. Sparks jumped, and the lock responded slowly, as though waking from centuries of sleep. With a loud hiss, the door opened, revealing a long corridor bathed in soft, pale light. Inside was something Evan had not seen in years: clean walls, unbroken floors, functioning lights. The air was cooler, fresher, free from the stench of decay. They stepped inside, and the door sealed behind them, cutting off the sounds of the ruined world. Beyond lay rows of advanced equipment, untouched by scavengers or time. Lyra moved ahead with cautious steps. Her markings pulsed brighter, as though resonating with the strange technology lining the walls. At the center of the chamber stood a cylindrical structure filled with softly glowing liquid. Strange consoles surrounded it, and holographic displays flickered to life as they approached. Evan stared in disbelief. "What is this place?" Lyra placed her palm on the cylinder and closed her eyes. Her voice was quiet, almost reverent. "Safe place made by humans they build before war ended. They make sanctuary hidden from machines, protected." Her golden eyes opened slowly, and for the first time Evan saw something close to hope shining in them. Suddenly alarms blared through the outpost. A deep metallic roar echoed from beyond the walls. The drones had arrived. Red lights flashed across the chamber as the door behind them shook violently under heavy impacts. The machines were relentless, and they had tracked them. Here Lyra's gaze snapped to the central console. Her voice was calm but urgent. "This place has defense, but power low, need recharge." Evan glanced around frantically until his eyes fell on a portable fusion core resting inside a sealed crate. He smashed it open with his metal rod and dragged the heavy cylinder toward the console. Lyra connected it with trembling hands, and the chamber came alive. The walls hummed and blue energy surged through conduits hidden beneath the floor outside. The pounding stopped, replaced by a deep rising hum. A pulse of light erupted from the outpost, stretching outward across the wasteland like ripples in water. When it faded, the silence returned. Evan hesitated, unsure what had just happened, but Lyra smiled faintly, though exhaustion weighed heavily on her. "Drones disabled. Field disrupts their network. They cannot come here now." Relief washed over him, so sudden and intense that his knees almost buckled. They were safe for the first time since the fall of the tunnels. He helped Lyra sit against the wall as the pale lights washed softly over them. Her glow was already returning slowly, her strength rebuilding itself. For a long moment neither spoke. They simply breathed, listening to the hum of a place untouched by ruin. Evan thought of all the years hiding underground, all the days surviving from scraps and fear. And suddenly the sanctuary felt like the first real promise of tomorrow. Lyra finally broke the silence, her voice quiet and Steady. This place can shelter more humans. Maybe others survived, we can call them. Evan nodded, his eyes fixed on the console where old communication systems still waited dormant. If they could reactivate them, maybe they could reach someone. Anyone who still lived out there, humanity's scattered remnants, might have a chance to unite again as the pale light reflected off the polished walls, and the quiet hum of the sanctuary surrounded them. Evan allowed himself to breathe without fear. For the first time in years, the machines still ruled the surface. The war was far from won. But here within this hidden refuge, something precious had been rediscovered: hope. And for Evan and Lyra, hope was enough to start again. The end.